Welcome back, fiber friends, to another episode of the Wool to Gold podcast. My name is Ryan, I am your host, and this week we are talking about quite possibly my favorite thing. I know I say that about essentially every subject around yarn, but this is truly one of my favorite things. It is different sheep breeds, so my sheep breed study in review for 2023. I wanted to sit down and count up and see just exactly how many different wool types I tried in this past year. The current number we're at is 45. I'm afraid that I'm going to remember more of them as this video goes along, and we're going to need to add to that list. So I'll update you if that happens. But right now we are at 45 different breeds of sheep that I have tried in the year 2023, and I would like to give you my honest review of all of them. Well, I know a lot of new spinners are kind of really intimidated by just the vast range of different wools to try, so we're going to talk a little bit about wool type today. I've broken all of the wools that I tried down into some major categories, and I'll go over those categories and kind of why I put each sheep in each one. A reminder that this is very, very subjective. Each person is going to be different. So what my preference is going to be different than your preference, and that's okay. I just kind of wanted to give my experiences. Most of these fleeces I had a pretty positive experience with. Talk a little bit about what and why I think I didn't enjoy the few fleeces that I did. I don't want to deter anyone from trying any of these breeds, so I want you to keep that in mind as you watch this video, and I'm going to try to use descriptors for the fleeces that maybe might help you figure out what you are more or less comfortable working with. So this is our ongoing list right here. You can see we have quite a few breeds to go through here. I have decided we are not going to be doing a whip check this week because I just don't want to. This is my podcast. I get to do what I want to, and I don't want to show you guys any of my whips right now. They're scattered about, they're disorganized. I don't really have much to say about any of them, and I just don't want to do it this week. Plus, this week we did have a single acquisition, so I wanted to show you guys that, or I guess one order of squishy mail. So I have not fully opened any of them. I have peeked at one of them. This is going to be my order from Fossil Fibers. I love Fossil Fibers. I love the dye jobs that go on at that company. Their packages are always wrapped really, really nicely, and like my own labels, many of them are handwritten with the details, and I just think that's nice. I didn't order anything too exciting. That being said, it is Fossil Fibers, so it's still kind of exciting. So I ordered 2 learning fiber kits. Now, these I ordered specifically for the purpose of using them for lessons that I'm going to be teaching over the course of January. I have a lot of time off in January, so I'm going to be teaching a few more in-person lessons for spinning. A reminder, if you are in the New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania area, I teach in-person lessons. You can try the Shacked, you can try the DT Lendrum. And I needed to re-up the fiber that I use for those lessons. And so I ordered just their learning fiber kits. Now, I didn't really read into the details, and I didn't realize I was going to be getting different things in each of these, which makes it even more exciting. So essentially what they send is, I believe it's like 4 different natural colors of either top or roving. So this first one is a 21.5 micron merino top for the striped. The white is the Corriedale top, ivory is the BFL top, and the silver is a 70-15-15 merino yak silk top, which is super interesting. And frankly, I tend to sort of hand curate the fibers that I bring to lessons so that they're sort of easier things to spin, but also I don't like to limit people. Maybe I should give people the option to spin something a little bit more luxury. This is going to be the merino top, a little bit of like striped gray and white. This would be great for someone who really, really wanted to learn to spin merino. but is a first-time spinner. I think the like white and black and being able to see exactly how much twist is going into your yarn, this would be great for a beginner. The silver is stunning, as I thought it would be. Look at that nice little shine to it. And then I was hoping the camera would help me tell the difference between these two in terms of which one is white, bright white, and which one is ivory. I think this is the Corriedale. I think this is the Corriedale top, and I think this is the BFL top, based on my experiences. The second fiber learning kit, the oatmeal, is 8515 BFL silk. The white is targy, the dark brown is an alpaca and wool farm roving. That's exciting. And the white / brown is an alpaca, targy, Columbia Rambouillet farm roving. Now this is definitely going, all of these fibers are going right into the teaching kit. I think a lot of these are going to be great for learning on. And I like giving people the option of like, wait for the crinkling to be over. I like to give people the option when I'm teaching them a lesson of like picking the fiber that they want to spin or having some choice over the fiber they want to spin, because I don't know, it just makes the lesson more engaging. I usually like to give people like colored options, like bright fun colors, but people are surprisingly drawn to simple colors for whatever reason when they start their first yarn. I know I did the same thing. My first yarn was made out of a natural brown and cream roving. I think it's just because beginners feel like we're not going to mess that fiber up. You know what I mean? Like with a hand-painted, hand-dyed roving or anything like that, I'm like, oh, when I was a beginner, I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna ruin it. I don't want to use that fiber. And I know now that that's silly, and I really try to unteach that thinking in my lessons. That's like one of the main things I focus on. For me, when I teach people to spin, a lot more of it is psychological than anything. I'm just like, just keep trying. Just keep doing it. Don't panic. We're gonna get through it. And that seems to work, because I think that's where a lot of people get sort of tripped up in spinning, is they just get in their own heads a little bit too much. All right, so what do we have here? This is the alpaca wool farm roving. It's very soft, very cushy. The oatmeal is beautiful. I love oatmeal though. That's probably my favorite neutral, if I'm being honest. This targy top is freaking delicious. This is something that I would give a spinner who is like, I really, really want to learn on merino, but if you insist that I learn on something else, I'd give them some targy instead. And then what was this last one? The white and brown. This is that really interesting blend. This is the one that I'd be tempted to keep for myself out of this pack, just because the blend is really interesting to me. And that is something that I like about Fossil Fibers. They do have some interesting blends. I've already spent like way too long talking about this acquisition, but that's okay. It's a small business. They deserve their time to shine. And this is the most exciting thing that I got from Fossil Fiber. So again, I'm trying to keep a lot of this stuff kind of packaged up together, because I plan on putting it just back up there in my little crochet hammock that I made for holding fiber, because I need more room for fiber in my life. So this is a Columbia Cross lamb fleece that's been dyed, but obviously it hasn't been processed, and it's in the colorway Sea Turtle. So we have an orange, we have this really nice like maroon and brown. I'm gonna try to get all the colors together. This is like a almost black, kind of sun goldy brown. I feel like it looks similar to the merino, but in person it is a little bit different. And then we also have this nice like almost sea foamy green, a little bit brighter than that green, and this really nice blue. Yeah, I have no idea what I'm gonna be doing with this with this Columbia Cross, but I saw these colors and I knew I needed it. And they had only done this Sea Turtle colorway dye on a Columbia Cross lamb and a Romney. And as I'll talk about later in the video, because I've spun Romney before, Romney's not my favorite. I like Romney. I like Romney in a blend, okay? If I'm like curating a blend for a sweater, I need to add a little bit more drape to something. I don't want it to be via alpaca. Romney is probably going to be my go-to. However, I just don't enjoy spinning it by itself. It's not my favorite. It's not my favorite. Don't hold it against me, okay? We all have our preference. This Columbia, though, I've been wanting to get my hands on some Columbia fleece. I have never spun Columbia before, and I pulled out just this blue lock when I first got this package, and it's the bounce for me. It's always elasticity is king for me. Yeah, I look forward to doing some kind of weird hand-carded blended adventure. I have been just on like a hand carding, I don't know, I'm having a hand carding moment lately. Sometimes I don't want to card wool, like, at all. It's like the last thing I want to do. And then sometimes it's all I want to do every day. And that's how you end up with a bunch of Rolags that you need to spin, which is my current situation right now. But that was just like a little reward for myself because I'm really working through a lot of fiber that I wanted to work through before the end of the year. Honestly, this list of wools is evidence to that, and so that was my little treat to myself. All right, back to the main event of today. What are we doing today? So I am going to be walking you through all of the different sheep breeds that I spun this year and essentially what I thought about them. I don't know if I'm going to be doing like a hard rating system because honestly, a lot of these were kind of just like, I'll tell you just straightforward. Some of them were just meh, and I don't have a lot more to say about them than like the spin was okay. It just like wasn't my favorite. I maybe will tell you a little bit why. But I'm not going to hold myself too accountable to a specific system when it comes to talking about these sheep breeds. And some of them I'll tell you a little bit more about the history, if the history is interesting, and some of them not so much. So one of the reasons that I got into spinning yarn in the first place is that I wanted to spin more rare breeds. I was really interested in breed-specific yarns because I love a farm yarn moment. Farm yarn is expensive though, and justifiably so. However, I wanted to try more wool, and I wanted to be able to do it with less money. I didn't want to have to buy an entire skein of every single type of sheep wool in order to be able to experience it. And that's kind of where spinning came in, because you can buy sample packs of, 20 grams of wool, 2 4-ounce little taster samples of wool, and then you can spin them up and see how that yarn looks if you like the yarn. That was really, really appealing to me. Also, the fact that, like, I definitely just feel more connected to all of these conservancy breeds now that I am a spinner and I get to spin them up. So if you are at the beginning of your spinning journey, maybe you have no interest in a breed study, but there is a reason we do a breed study, and it's because even though you think you know what all wool feels like, you really do, especially those of you who are afraid of anything but the fine wools. Y'all think you know a long wool. You think you know all long wools because you know one long wool. That is not true, okay? And it's so, in my opinion, the long wool experience is really dependent on how you spin it. And so if you don't spin that yarn in, I think, the right way, you're just going to end up with a super ropey, coarse yarn, and I think that's what people think of a lot of the times when they think of a long wool. But we'll get into that. We'll talk about it a little bit. I started with long wools, and that I think is quite possibly the longest list I have here. My long wool list and my medium wool list are about the same size, so that definitely tells you something about my preferences when it comes to wool. Before we jump into the main event, I just want to give a quick disclaimer before we get into this. So once again, these are all my opinions. You can disagree with them. You can like wools that I wasn't really a fan of, and you can absolutely detest wools that I am obsessed with. It is a personal preference thing. It's one of the wonderful things about art, about spinning. You can have your preferences. I also wanted to mention that at the end of the day, there is so much variability even within a sheep breed that is not known for having a lot of variability in the wool. So there are some breeds, Jacob sheep are a really prime example of that, where the breed is known for having a variable type fleece. So some of the fleeces are very fine, and then some of the fleeces are very coarse, and that is sort of the breed standard. Even in sheep where the breed standard is not variability, you're going to have different types of fleeces, and you will be really, really surprised. I'm constantly surprised by just how different fleeces can be, depending on how that sheep was raised, the area it was raised in, you know, all these different factors. So do keep that in mind that, you know, I'm not trying to yuck anybody's yum, and conversely, like, don't yuck my yum just because you had a bad experience with one, you know, Lincoln long wool fleece one time or something like that. Now that the disclaimer is out of the way, where are we going to start? We're going to start with the down breeds. We're going to start with the shorties. Now, a quick little review if you are super unfamiliar with the down breed. So, a lot of people mistakenly think that down breed refers to, like, the wool type. Like, they think of, like a duck down or something like that. That's a really common misconception. So it's actually referring to the Downs region of England, and that's where those sheep get their name. So there are technically, I think, 6 technical down breeds, right? And then there are down-like breeds. So breeds that either have a Downs genetic background and have sort of this, the wool has a tendency to be, at least in my experience, very springy in a lot of cases, in the best cases. All of my favorite down breeds have more of a spring to them. They're not overly crisp or coarse, although there are some down breeds that are a little bit on the coarser side. The staple length is generally very short, so we're talking like under 3 inches. If you hate working with fine wools because they're on the shorter side, you might not love working with down wools. However, I'm not a fan of the fine wool, and I am a fan of the down wool. And one of the reasons for that is because down wools don't felt. And that is just the coolest thing in the world to me. Like, nature's superwash. They make great sock yarns. I'm not a sock knitter. I never will be a sock knitter. I can confidently say that, in fact. However, they make a great sock yarn. There's no doubt about it. It's just a really neat fiber. I think it's super cool that it doesn't felt in the washer and dryer. And I've actually done some experiments where I tried to felt a Suffolk fleece, and I couldn't. So we're actually going to talk about that Suffolk fleece first, because that was my first ever down breed. It was one of the first sheep fleeces that I ever processed, and it was Nicholas, the 4H Suffolk. So to this day, I still have some of Nicholas in my closet. I really loved spinning that fleece. It was a pleasure, especially for a beginner. It was surprisingly enjoyable, and it really opened my eyes to just how enjoyable a down breed spin can be. I think as a beginner, I was a little bit nervous about spinning the down breeds. I found them super intriguing. They have a fascinating history. They are traditionally raised as meat sheep. So a lot of the times trying to get your hands on a down breed fleece that is in really good condition and cut with a hand spinner in mind. And what I mean by that is that there aren't a ton of second cuts, and that the fleece is free of a ton of debris and hay and things like that. It can be difficult to get our hands on it because the sheep are not raised for fiber. That being said, if you can get your hands on a 4H fleece, that's where it's at. Those fleeces are pristine. They're super clean. Nicholas had no VM. Like, actually no VM. To this day, I have not come across a cleaner fleece than that $16 Suffolk fleece I purchased at Maryland Sheep and Wool. And it was such a pleasure to spin. I have an example of the actual fabric that it made right here, because it made it into my breed study scarf. So there's a few different breeds in this, and I'll bring this back out as we come across those breeds. However, right here is Nicholas, and you can see it was just a beautiful lilac gray. Super duper soft, super squishy. Absolute pleasure. Now, I am going to take this as an opportunity to talk about how variable different fleeces can be, because what I also have here is my white Suffolk down sample that I spun. Now, this is going to be a UK sample. Again, all of these super small UK samples are going to be sourced from the Witchwood Spinner, and I'll link her Etsy shop below. She might have breed packs, study packs still available. I am not sure. This is my Suffolk down sample. I talked about this when I was walking through my yarn tour, and I'll link that below as well if you just want to see all of my yarn, hand spun or not. But I did not like spinning this. This was not a pleasure to spin. I did not have a ton of fun doing it, and I probably wouldn't do it again. So I do think it really depends on the fleece that you get. I also find that this fiber is just not as soft as Nicholas was, and like if Nicholas was harder to spin, that would have been acceptable because the fleece was just so beautiful and so soft, but it was also a pleasure to spin, and it's impeccably soft. So I don't know. Dream down fleeces are out there. You just have to look for them. Next up, I have the Hampshire down. Now, I really liked spinning the Hampshire down as well. I found it had a slightly longer down staple length. There are some down breeds that really do have like 2 inches to them, an inch and a half maybe. I think this had a good 2.5, 3-inch staple length, and it was just enjoyable. It was a pleasure to spin. It carded up really evenly, and it spun up really evenly. So yeah, Hampshire down, 10 out of 10. Especially compared to this spin, I just enjoyed this a lot more. And then I am going to bring up the last down or down-like breed that I am not a huge fan of, or at least I wasn't a huge fan of spinning the sample that I got. I would like to sample more because there's a breed-up program going on in the US now, and that is going to be the Kerry Hill. So this is not technically a down breed, but it does have a lot of down genetics in its background, and as I was working with it, it was giving down breed. This was not my favorite spin. I don't know if it's because I'm pretty sure this fleece had a break in it, which is essentially, oh gosh, it's like worse than a second cut. It's like a second cut over the entire fleece that the shear has no control over. So I'd say maybe about 1/2 inch in, there was a break in the fleece, and so I had to like go through all of the locks and remove that. If you follow me on TikTok, you know this fleece also had a little bit of scarf in it. Now, that is like, listen, once in a while, even on a really good fleece, you might run into a little bit of scarf. It's just like a human being. Sometimes you have a little bit of dandruff. Sometimes sheep have a little bit of dandruff. I just separated off that piece of the fleece. But also, even after I, kind of sorted my way through the break, this was not my favorite down-like breed to spin, and I think that had to do with the multitude of staple lengths. Now, it's funny because when I'm not working with a down breed, when I'm working with a primitive breed, I don't mind like 8 different staple lengths. I really don't. Like Texel, throw it at me. I can handle it. Or Hogs Island, that's another one that can have a really such a variety of staple length. I don't mind it. I think it can be a little bit fun. I love a lumpy hand spun yarn, or like a more woolen spun yarn in general. And with that generally comes some amount of inconsistency, but this was just not it. This was just not it. I was not a fan. And considering that fiber probably will felt, because it's not a true down breed like these, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be going back for more. That being said, there are some other down breeds that I am a big fan of. So I have spun Shropshire down, and that was really fun. That was another sample that I got in my breed study pack, and frankly, I know the sample is lying around somewhere, but it's deep in my yarn stash, and I don't know. I can't find it. So I'm sure it'll come back up because I'm pretty sure it's in a project bag with a bunch of other down samples that I'm missing because I have plans to make a pair of all down sample mittens. Just because the fiber doesn't felt right, so something like mittens where there's like a lot of abrasion and dampness that gets on them, I just think that would make a good project. And then something that I also can't find my plain white sample of, I know it exists, I can see it in my mind's eye, but I do have the dyed sample actually in this breed study scarf is South Down. So this specific sample is actually Baby Doll South Down. I ended up following up with Hidden Pastures and asking what down fiber actually went into their down roving. I had a ton of fun spinning this. I found the Baby Doll South Down to have a really consistent staple, and much like this Suffolk sample, it was just like a pleasure to spin. It was really fun. Now, I think with down, if you're processing it yourself, if you can scour it yourself, and hit that nice midpoint where you leave just like a little touch of lanolin in it still, just a little bit, oh, you will have the most pleasurable spin of your life. I think if you like fully scour it, you'll also have a really pleasurable spin. But I think just like a little touch of lanolin makes everything go so smoothly. Now there are some people who are going to be like, blasphemy, you should always scour the heck out of all of your fiber so there's no lanolin left. Again, this is a personal preference thing, okay? Like, I'm not the fiber police and neither are you. So let's not play that game today. I just think there are certain fibers that definitely spin better with a little touch of lanolin left in them, and there are some wools that I think are just more fun to spin if they're like scoured, like scoured very, very well. Medium type wool. I'm talking about medium type wool, but we'll, again, personal preference, and we'll get to that later. So next up in our list of things that I have spun is going to be our fine wool section. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about history and a few different things in this. And we're going to start with the one that is the most obvious, that I've obviously spun. I think most spinners have at some point spun merino in their time on this earth, because there's just so much of it. It's everywhere. It's what people who don't spin assume spinners want to spin. I think because, you know, merino is just one of those like commercial terms. It's commercially available, familiar wool to, I think, most average consumers, even people who don't knit or crochet or know anything about yarn or sheep. Now, I have a lot of feelings about merino. Here's the thing. A lot of people think I don't like merino, and that's not true. I actually do like some merino. Now, generally, I like to spin a slightly higher micron merino. I like a little bit of like extra loft and like crunch to my merino, and so I generally like it to be slightly higher micron. Like, I like a toothy wool. I like my wools toothy. I started with a long wool. I don't find that a ton of long wools do give me the prickle factor. Some of them absolutely do, but not a ton of them give me the prickle factor. And so I'm definitely just blessed with being less sensitive, and I know that that is like a privilege or whatever, and try to get people to try things other than merino, because that's really what this video is about. I really want to broaden people's views about all different types of wool you can try. And if you are a merino fanatic, these next wools that I'm going to talk about that fall into the fine wool category are definitely going to be for you. So first, I'm going to shout out to my favorite fine wool, full stop, California Variegated Mutant, CVM. I love my CVM fleece. I'm processing one right now. One of the reasons that I love it is because I think it is easier to process than a lot of other fine wools. Merino, obviously, but I also think it's easier to process than something like a Rambouillet fleece, which is also, I think, very tempting for a lot of fine wool fanatics, because Rambouillet is delicious and beautiful and cushy and soft. But I bring you the CVM. This is a conservation breed too. So if you buy CVM fleece, you buy CVM roving, you are supporting keeping an endangered animal from going extinct. So that's radical. Thank you for doing your part. But also it comes in white if you want to dye it. It comes in a variety of grays and blacks and browns if you are a natural fleece guy, which I definitely am. I have one in this beautiful lilac gray. It is fluffy and cushy, and what I mean by easier to process than a merino fleece is that it is less greasy. So fine wool fleeces, the way they stay so soft and fine on the sheep and they don't mat is all of that lanolin and all of that grease, right? And all that's a great thing. That's what protects the fleece, but also getting that out of such a dense, blocky staple can be really, really, really difficult and time consuming. I often find that I need to scour fine wool fleeces at least 3 times more than medium or long wool fleeces. We'll talk about, there can be a lot of variability in lanolin in those, but especially medium wool fleeces, just the processing time versus fine versus medium is pretty dramatic. And so if you want a fine wool fleece that's slightly less greasy and slightly less likely to accidentally felt or, nep the fiber. So when you're carding up the fiber, if you choose to card it instead of comb it, or if you choose to send it through a drum carder, sometimes little neps can form, and this is when the fiber kind of like folds back onto itself and gets in little knots. And a lot of the time spinners remove those neps as we spin because we don't want those like lumps and bumps, because they can feel kind of harder too when you're actually touching the yarn. And so we'll remove the neps. If you're afraid of the nepping that comes with a merino fleece and carding merino fleece, CVM, baby. It just, it will nep and it will felt under the right conditions. It's just slightly less easy to accidentally felt it. And again, conservation breeds are just near and dear to my heart. I think there's a lot of really good US CVM producers and breeders right now. So CVM fleece, I really enjoy spinning it. I think the staple length is also slightly longer, pretty consistently slightly longer than merino. So merino usually lies around 3.5 inches. And then when it comes to CVM, in my experience, that's really 3.5 is like such a short CVM. In my experience, it's usually 4.5 if you're lucky. I think the current fleece I have is closer to 4.5. Another fine wool with a slightly longer staple length, but one that is definitely equally as sensitive as merino, at least in my experience, when it comes to felting and sometimes just being a little bit difficult to draft is... Okay, next up are going to be some fine wools that I kind of all put in like this similar category of fine wools that I recommend if you insist on starting with a fine wool. And I'm going to list them in order of enjoyment. So at the very, very top, and I have the sample right here, is going to be Polworth. I love Polworth. It can have an insanely long staple length, considering it is a fine wool. I'm talking like a range of like 4 to 7 inches here, which is wild to think about. Now, the reason for that is because a Polworth is a cross technically between a merino and a Lincoln in terms of their genetics, but you still have that amazing softness. Like, it is a fine wool. Do not let those Lincoln long wool genetics, scare you off. And this was a Polworth and silk blend that was honestly... Like, blends with silk can sometimes be really hard to draft and get a handle of. This was honestly really, really enjoyable to spin. This is a wonderful base. I actually blended this with some merino recently in order to make a base, sort of like an art bat base for another project. Next up after that is going to be Rambouillet. Now, I know that some people have some pretty negative feelings about Rambouillet. I feel like y'all are getting some really short stapled Rambouillet. In my experience, I feel like my Rambouillet that I get tends to be on the longer staple end. Now, the Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook states that it can be anywhere from, what does it say? 2 to 5 inches, which is a lot of variability. I've never had 2-inch or even 3.5-inch Rambouillet. I've always been in like the 4 to 5-inch staple length Rambouillet experience. I have a fleece right now that, heck, it might be 5.5 inches on this Rambouillet. Now, when I do admit that I still find myself kind of stuck in like short forward draw or inchworming when it comes to drafting Rambouillet, Polworth, I can, under the right circumstances, do like a supported long draw pretty easily with. Rambouillet definitely gives me a little bit of trouble. I can't really do that technique. I tend to do short forward if I want any semblance of a consistent yarn. And I feel that same way about Cormo. Now, a lot of people prefer Cormo to Rambouillet, and this kind of makes sense when you look at the genetics of the sheep. So Rambouillet is kind of like a cousin of merino, but Cormo, as the name suggests, is a cross between a Corriedale and a merino. And those, if anybody who's spun Corriedale knows, I know we're not talking about medium wool yet, but Corriedale is one of my favorite medium wools. It spins so easily. It just spins itself. It's magic. And so adding those genetics, I think, to the merino does make for a much easier spin. Now, despite the Corriedale merino background, in my experience, I actually had personally a little bit more trouble spinning the Cormo than I did the Rambouillet. Now, again, this is personal experience. I definitely got a Cormo that was kind of on the shorter side. I think it was about 3.5 inches in staple length. And I don't know why, I just could not get it to draft consistently. I think it had to do with, where my hands were, and the fact that I tried spinning Cormo very, 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 very early in my spinning journey. So I think if I went back to it, I might have a little bit more fun. But again, I'm just giving you my honest opinion and my honest experience in spinning these. Both the Rambouillet and the Cormo samples that I have, I did turn into a hat for one of my friends, so I don't have them any longer to show you. But we're gonna move on to some more obscure fine wools and some samples that I do have to show you. So one of my favorite fine wools that I have ever spun, full stop, has been the Manx Locked In. Now, it is such a small little stripe on, this is a this is a hooded capelet that I crocheted a while ago, and then I felted to finish it because I crocheted it way, way, way too big. And it ended up felting and shrinking to exactly the right size, which is awesome. But right up here, there is some Manx Locked In that I carded up and spun, and this was one of my favorite fine wools to work with. Yes, the staple length was like 3.5 inches. However, here's my thing, right? Here's why I enjoyed working with the Manx Locked In versus the Merino. Frankly, I think it's just that, like, it's a rare wool. It's a rare wool. There are not as many Manx Locked In. It's a conservation breed, and I'm just willing, personally, to put a lot more labor into a yarn or a sample if it is a rare wool or it is a conservation breed, because if somebody happens to just ask, hey, what's that wool? If I'm wearing this, then I get the opportunity to actually talk about the Manx Locked In and tell people about it. And I just think that that's worth it, right? That's worth the extra labor. It's worth it being a little bit more of a pain to draft. I mean, it really was like an island merino, which if you spin wool, you know what I'm talking about, because you know how humid environments kind of affect the overall, like, texture and bounce of a wool. I don't know. I find that, like, humid type wools, for whatever reason, or the wools that come off of sheep that thrive in humid environments, just have a hand that I really, really enjoy. It's probably because I, too, thrive in a humid environment. And so I appreciate where they're coming from. They're usually also pretty parasite resistant, just because, humid environments are a bastion of parasites. So to survive in areas like that, you have to be pretty resilient. And I just wanted to give you sort of a close-up on this, because this color brown is pretty distinctive to the Manx Locked In. So the lambs are born black, and after a few weeks they turn this brown color here. And this is not hand spun, but I am just going to bring it up because we were talking about Cormo. This yarn up here and this yarn down here are Cormo. All right, coming back to the breed study scarf, we have this colored Ryland here. Now, this was probably my first fine wool that I ever spun that I really enjoyed spinning. That wasn't just an absolute headache to spin. And I wouldn't learn until later that it was actually a fine wool versus a medium wool. But I really like colored Ryland. I actually picked up a little bit more colored Ryland from Ross Farms when I was at Rhinebeck, because I just enjoyed the experience so much. I have not spun any of it yet. It is sitting in my stash right now. However, I really enjoyed spinning the colored Ryland. All right, so the last two sheep that we're going to talk about that I'm going to put in the fine wool category definitely run the range of like fine to medium wool. So don't come at me for putting them in the fine wool category, okay? I'm just going by kind of where the Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook honestly puts them and marks them down as. So first, the Castle Milk Morit. My pitch for the Castle Milk Morit being a fine wool is the fact that it does have a Manx Locked In genetic background, which I love, fascinating, has a very similar color. I am just a fan of that warm, it's warmer than a camel brown. It's like a caramel kind of toasted brown color. I'm obsessed with that, and that's generally the color that the Castle Milk Morits come in as well. So the first time I got my hands on a sample, most of that sample had scurf in it, which was really, really disappointing. However, the portion of it that did not have scurf, I did spin up, and it was beautiful, very similar in coloring to the Manx locked in and very easy to spin as well, but super duper soft. Definitely what I would consider a fine wool. So that was another thing that when I was at Rhinebeck, I picked up some Castle Milk Morit from Ross Farm as well. Now the last wool that I have is definitely something that is like controversially in the fine wool. However, I've spun a whole 4 ounces of it, and I think it should be considered a fine wool, honestly, is California Red. So you would never know that this was a California Red, not lamb's fleece. It was a second year cut. Because I covered up all of the red tinge with an accidental green dye job. I still haven't rinsed this skein. If you've been here for a while, you've seen this a few times. This was really fun to spin, though. Honestly, I think that California Red is one of those things that, again, if you want to get a finer wool, a softer wool, but you're super duper worried that you're going to felt it, I think it's going to be harder to felt something like this. Will it felt? Absolutely. Mind your agitation, okay? Don't be shaking the hot fleece around. However, you know, if you have a tendency to want to poke the warm fleece, which I talked about in my scouring video, if you want to go back and watch that, I recently added timestamps to it so you can skip around to the parts that you actually want to see and skip over the parts that you're not interested in. However, when you're hot scouring, you really shouldn't move the fleece around because that's what actually felts it, not just the hot water. It's the agitation in the hot water. And this is one of those fleeces that is definitely a little bit harder to felt. So logic would dictate that we go to the medium wools next. However, there's a few reasons we're not going to do that. First, the medium wool and the long wool lists are very, very long. I don't think you're prepared for just how long they are. So we're going to knock out the next, sort of the last smaller grouping of wool types that I have, which is going to be primitive breeds. This also makes sense because technically I put the Manx locked in the fine wool category. However, if we're being really technical about it, the Manx locked is a primitive breed. And so we're going to jump to the primitive breeds next. And we're going to start with one of my favorite primitive breeds, which is Jacob sheep. So Jacob sheep are super popular here in New Jersey. I feel like if New Jersey had a state sheep, it would be the Jacob sheep. We have a lot of them. Here is one of my first ever Jacob samples. It ended up in my breed study scarf. One of the really notable things about the Jacob sheep is it does come in sort of, they're spotted. They're the spotted sheep. They're the ones mentioned in the Bible. And so they come in like a variety of colors in one fleece, which is really appealing if you're looking to make sort of a colorwork sweater, but all from one sheep. Get yourself a Jacob. I have another Jacob sample here, and this is going to be from a fleece that I purchased at New Jersey Sheep and Wool, and I processed myself, and her name was Catherine. Again, she was a Jacob sheep. She had more of a variety of grays and browns in her as opposed to like blacks and whites, but she was also a really beautiful Jacob sheep sample. I think that if you're interested in primitive breeds, I think Jacob sheep are really underrated. I think a lot of people jump right to Icelandic and Shetlands, which I love and I'll talk about in just a moment. But I just think that Jacob sheep are really awesome. They can have up to 6 horns. They're really, really cool to look at. Like, look up some pictures of Jacob sheep. Very interesting. And again, they were the sheep of the year at Maryland Sheep and Wool this past year. I used to think I wanted to raise Jacobs, but then I met them and they have very goaty personalities. Like, they are definitely more escape artists than a lot of other sheep. Sheep are generally pretty docile, pretty easy to manage and keep in one area. I've seen Jacob sheep try to eat literal tree branches. They're the wildest of sheep. They have really interesting personalities, and I find that especially primitive smaller sheep tend to have really rambunctious personalities compared to some of these larger breeds. When I start talking about the long wools, I am going to talk more about personality of sheep because I have heavily considered owning long wool sheep for about a year now, and I have gotten the opportunity to meet a lot of different long wool sheep, and I think they have very distinct personalities. But so do Jacob sheep. I just thought I would bring it up. They're really interesting, funny little creatures. Again, they can have up to 6 horns, even the females, and I just think that's really cool. Now, I mentioned Shetland sheep, and that is another sheep that I have spun multiple samples of Shetland, and they can also have a really big variety when it comes to the micron count in their fleece, because once again, they're a primitive breed. Now, here is one of my first Shetland samples. This made me fall in love with Shetland. I don't know if the camera is going to pick it up, but it is technically like a little bit of a lock spin. I kind of just picked the locks apart and then spun it up. I love the oatmeal colors here. I love an oatmeal Shetland in general. And then I also have a sample of Shetland from my friend Sam that I have plans to hand card together with a little bit of like rainbow colored sari silk and make kind of like a funfetti cake yarn. The Shetland sample I have over here is definitely just as fine, but a little bit drapier and has a slightly longer staple length than the first Shetland sample that I spun up. But that's another really cool introductory primitive breed that I am a big fan of. Now, one primitive breed that I had kind of just a meh experience with is Icelandic. Now, I know a lot of people who are diehard Icelandic wool fans. Again, I'm not trying to like deter anyone from trying it. I just found Icelandic it spun. Now that I've spun Drysdale, it kind of reminds me of Drysdale, but considering it is such a cherished wool, I kind of expected it to be a little bit more fun to spin. I don't know, maybe it was because the sample that I got was particularly kempy. And I'm not even really that, like, I don't really have an issue spinning Kemp. I spin a lot of Kemp because I love a coarser long wool breed, but I just did not find the Icelandic to be for me. You know what it is about the Icelandic fleece that just did not call to me personally. So a lot of the times the primitive breeds that I like are either primitive sheep breeds that are primitive in their fleece in that there's a high amount of variability, like the Jacob. I think that's a really prime example. Or I really like primitive fleeces that are not just 2 staple lengths, that are like 8 or 9 different staple lengths. That is the kind of primitive fleece that's really appealing to me. And I think the Icelandic is one of those very well-developed primitive fleeces. Like it has a lot of consistency across the sheep, so much so that it has a definitional top coat, the tog, and then undercoat. And I just think I didn't like dealing with just 2 staple lengths. That resulted in a kind of inconsistency that really bugged me. And I find that I don't have those same issues when I have like 4 or 5 different staple lengths, like a higher variability in the staple length, or alternatively all 1 staple length, but more variability in the actual fineness of the fiber, again, like the Jacob. And I think that that's what I didn't like about the Icelandic fleece. I think I put my finger on it. That's just, it just wasn't for me. I totally get the appeal for other people, but I do not think I'm going to be sourcing any more Icelandic fleeces personally. Now, you might be asking yourself, Brian, what did you spin that had like 4 to 8 different staple lengths? The North Ronaldsay is a great example of that. So I just am still so enchanted by this sheep. It eats seaweed. It's a super primitive breed. Super duper hardy. Anytime they brought any other sheep to try to crossbreed with the North Ronaldsay, all of those crossbreeds just can't hack it in the environment. They grow up in a really harsh environment. Sheep like this are the reason that I call sheep the potatoes of the livestock world. If you are somebody who knows a lot about like genetics and food and food accessibility, you know that potatoes are incredibly adaptable. There are potatoes that grow in the Andes, and I find that sheep are the same way. They are just very, very adaptable. If given enough time, they can really thrive in any type of condition, and I think the North Ronaldsay is a great example. They have a outer coat, and they definitely have some coarser outer coat hairs, but the undercoat is super duper soft, and it has a lot of variability in its length. I think there were a ton of different staple lengths bouncing around in this skein, but it was really fun, and because of all those different staple lengths, it weirdly results in a surprisingly even yarn, because it all just kind of evens out. Like with every handful, with every like yard that you're spinning, you're getting like all 8 staple lengths in there, and so it kind of just evens itself out. Did not find that to be the case with the Icelandic. And then recently, one of my whips actually is currently a little bit of Navajo churro fleece that I'm spinning. This is my first time spinning Navajo churro. I did not know how I was going to feel about it. I was a little bit hesitant because I didn't know if it was going to be like the Drysdale fleece that I'm spinning right now, which I don't mind, and I'm getting through it, but it's not my favorite, and I'll talk about why that is, I think, when I actually talk about the long wools. However, I have really loved spinning the Navajo churro fleece. I think I spun almost 4 ounces of it in a single sitting, not even like a whole day. I'd call it like half a day's time. I almost spun up a whole 4-ounce sample of the Navajo churro. It's so much fun, and I find it's kind of like the North Ronalds say, where there is a lot of high kind of variability in the actual staple length of the fleece, but that's kind of what makes it fun and also results in it kind of being super even at the end of the day. I also love the way the Navajo churro drafts, and I know a lot of people feel that way because Navajo churro is one of those breeds that's recommended for people who like to drop spindle. It's really easy to just kind of process the fleece and then drop spin directly from the fleece without any further processing. I'm not going to take those samples off of my wheel, but I think I have a finished bobbin I can show you. Alrighty, so this is that Navajo churro bobbin. This was so much fun. Like, when I'm done with this video, I'm going to go back and finish spinning the rest of this. I sourced this fiber from Nouveau, so this is definitely a different source. This is hand-pulled roving, and some of it, as you can see, is hand-dyed, but it was just a pleasure to spin. It was so much fun. Alrighty, so next up, we are going to talk about the medium wools. This is a biggie here. It's a very large category. So I am going to break it down into sections. So first we're going to talk about my absolute favorites of all of the medium wools that I tried, because I tried a lot of them. And if we talk about each of them individually, we are going to be here forever. So my favorites this year were the U.S. Cheviot, Corriedale, obviously, Kent Romney, and Coopworth. Now, why were these my favorite? So I find these to be the medium wools that are just the easiest to spin. They just spin like butter. The Kent Romney I actually prepared myself, and it spun up super nicely. And one of the reasons I preferred the Kent Romney to the US Romney is that Kent Romney has a little bit of loft that I find that normal US Romney doesn't have. So one of the reasons that I just wasn't a huge fan of spinning a ton of Romney is that the yarn that I ended up with was super drapey. Now, part of the reason had to do with the way that I was drafting this. However, I do think that Romney is just a wool type that tends to be on the drapier side. And so I think it has a lot of potential for future blends for me, like sweater blends possibly. However, I don't see myself using a lot of US Romney by itself. Now, Kent Romney is a different story. It has a little bit more loft to it, and I really liked the colors that I got of the Kent Romney. So here's the Kent Romney sample that I have. And it was just really, really easy to prepare, really, really easy to spin. Speaking of, in this breed study scarf, all of the pink in this is going to be Corriedale. So if you know, you know. This is the dog yarn scarf. If you want to know all about making dog yarn, you can also find that video linked below. And for the dog yarn scarf, the blend that I chose to go with was Corriedale. Because Corriedale wool is so easy to spin, I, rightfully so, suspected that if I blended it with a very difficult to spin fiber like dog hair, that it would make the entire spin a lot more enjoyable. And boy howdy, was I right. Another reason that I just absolutely adore Corriedale. So Corriedale and Cheviot are also fibers that you can easily find in white varieties, and they take dye really nicely. Coopworth you can also get in white, but I also see in a lot of colored varieties as well. And I have some brown Coopworth that I've been drop spinning that is just an absolute pleasure. Like, it's just so unbelievably easy to spin. I think it's a great wool that I really would recommend for beginners. Now, next up are going to be our drapier medium type wool. So as I mentioned, we have Romney. That is a drapier type medium wool. And then the other wool that I decided to put in this category is going to be East Frisian. So I only have a small little East Frisian skein right here. My other East Frisian skein is blended with a little bit of silk, which obviously adds to the drapiness factor as well. I don't think that you can tell in the skein. However, this fiber definitely does have kind of that Romney drape to it. Now, obviously, you can draft it to add a little bit of loft to it, as I did in this skein. However, I find that it's definitely on the drapier side. I think that that is a breed that also has high blending potential for me. And if you're unfamiliar with the East Frisian, they're a really interesting sheep because they are a tri-purpose breed. So they're raised for their fiber, they're raised for their meat, and they're raised for their dairy. Last category in medium wools, and definitely the one that has the longest list of wools in it, is going to be our lofty medium wool category. Now, obviously, this is kind of broad here, but the wools that I decided to put in this category were the Brecknock Hill Cheviot. So that is a Welsh type of Cheviot. I found that compared to the US breed of Cheviot, it is a little bit coarser. It does have a slightly longer staple length as well. And here is a side-by-side. So this is the Brecknock Hill Cheviot, and this is the US Cheviot. Again, I really enjoyed spinning both of these. I do think I prefer the US Cheviot, though. And then some loftier breeds that I already used the skeins of yarn, or I have gifted them to people already, are going to be Tunis. So I've sold off a lot of my Tunis spins just because Tunis wool is a really, really fun beginner spin. I do put it in the medium category. Tunis can sometimes have a bit of a shorter staple length. Some people go as far as calling it down like. However, I decided to put it in more of the medium type category. In this category, I'm also going to put the Montadale and the Clun Forest. I enjoyed spinning both of these. I thought I would enjoy spinning the Clun Forest a lot more than I did. And that's another breed that is kind of down-like, but I think if I had to pick, I think I would probably pick the Tunis over the Clun Forest and the Montadale. However, I do know that Solitude Yarns has a really nice Montadale base. That's what kind of tempted me to try the fiber, and I think if I spun it in a more worsted style, I would like my results a little bit more. And then also falling into the medium type category, however, definitely leading us more into the long wool type and definitely coarser wools in general, are going to be the Black Welsh Mountain, the Tordu, the Torwin. I'm pretty sure I used my Tordu sample in a project a while back, and then I don't know where my Black Welsh Mountain is. But I do have more Black Welsh Mountain fiber to blend up and spin, so expect to see more of that. But right here, I do have the Torwin, and as you can see, this is a really nice, almost true black fiber. And so I think that's kind of the trade-off that you make here. So it's really hard to find a true black fiber. Even this, if you look very closely, this is very dark brown. However, the camera is not picking that up. I feel like the camera is picking it up as being even darker than my hair, which it is, but it's very hard to find a true black fleece. And so I think that the trade-off that you make in fineness for this, you do get the added benefit of actually getting an almost true black fiber. And my plans with my Black Welsh Mountain is to actually blend it up with some sari silk. I think it's just going to look absolutely beautiful, and I think it'll kind of lend itself to adding a little bit more softness to the end product. I think a lot of coarser medium wools just have a lot of nice blending potential and can make some difficult fine wool spins a little bit easier if you can strike the right balance in a blend. Okay, so last but not least, we're talking about my favorite category of wools. So this is the long wools. Both my favorite and some of my least favorite spins fall into this category, so it's definitely going to be an interesting one. So I wanted to start by saying, first things first, Lincoln long wools. They are one of my favorite breeds of sheep. I love Lincoln long wools. I love working with the wool. I love the sheep themselves. If you've ever interacted with a Lincoln, they're very docile and just sweet-natured and mellow. They're gentle giants. They're giving Great Dane energy. I have a ginormous lazy dog, and I just feel like they give that kind of energy. I also just think they're beautiful and stunning to look at. The curls are just breathtaking. I think they're beautiful sheep, and if I just got to stare at Lincoln Longwools every day for the rest of my life, I would be a happy man. I'd be okay. So whether it is white Lincoln Longwool or colored Lincoln Longwool, I like both. I'm going to insert a picture here of me holding up a Lincoln Longwool rug that I made out of a colored Lincoln Longwool fleece. And then I also have some FOs that I made with the white fleece that I spun. This was a lock spin. I spun some of it white, and then I did dye some of it with logwood. And I really like the results when you process, whether you card, comb, or lock spin Lincoln Longwool. I just think the end product yarn is guaranteed to be beautiful. Now, as I mentioned, some of my least favorite spins are also in this category, so let's talk about those. First, Swaledale. I'll admit it. The Swaledale, it defeated me. Was it the shedding? Was it the inability to get a grip with the staple length? Was it a combination of both of those and the fact that it was definitely spun very, very early in my spinning journey? Probably all of these factors. However, Swaledale, it was one of those fibers that just shed so much. There's some long wools that don't shed at all, but there are definitely the hairier long wools that shed like you have a cat in your lap. I mean, it's unbelievable. I had to vacuum multiple times after spinning the Swaledale. It just was not the vibe. And then my other least favorite spin, and this I think is going to surprise a lot of people because it is a well-loved breed, and I don't want this to deter anybody from trying the fiber, because I did try the fiber again as prepared top and enjoyed it a lot more, but Cotswold, my first white Cotswold sample, I think the sample that I got was not scoured well enough. Some longwool breeds are really oil heavy and grease heavy, and some of them aren't as grease heavy, and I think Cotswolds are definitely one that is definitely heavier on the lanolin. And so the sample was sticky, and when you're working with a sticky sample that also has an insanely long staple length, and mind you, I was maybe 3 months into spinning, I was not prepared. I don't think I finished that spin. I don't think I could. I think I spun maybe 6 yards total, like about 3 yards of 2-ply, which is not the vibe. And so those were probably my not so favorite spins of my year. That being said, there were some spins that shed that I didn't mind as much. So both my white-faced and my gray-faced Dartmoor spin, those shed a fair amount, but I didn't mind it as much, and the shedding didn't, shoot up at my face. At least it, fell to the ground. I was able to vacuum it up fairly quickly. It wasn't that much shedding. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I dyed the white-faced Dartmoor here with lac, and then I have the gray-faced Dartmoor crocheted here. This is just, a felted mat that I made, kind of not super great construction here, but I just wanted to use up some of my felting wools essentially to make a little mat to put underneath my desk, and it serves a purpose. It works. I also have some caracal wool here, which I did not spin myself, but I like working with caracal wool. It's really fun. And then I also have some long wool. I don't remember which breeds of long wool, though, that I blended with recycled cut up pieces of yarn, and then I felted it all together. And that's probably my favorite part of this felting project. Besides this little portion up here, which is Lincoln long wool from the rug that I made. So I actually ended up spinning up a little tiny bit of that rug wool that I had, and then I did add it to this project because I just thought it's special. Again, that was one of my very early fleeces that I ended up processing, was a Lincoln long wool fleece. So I also think that's why Lincolns just have a very special place in my heart. Things about Dartmoor, I mean, you're gonna end up with a pretty coarse yarn, even if you don't put a ton of twist in it. It's definitely one of those long wools that even I can't really stand to have, next to skin, so I would definitely reserve that for, outerwear garments and felting projects. Oh, I did want to talk about colored Cotswold, because, as I mentioned, the Cotswold sample really defeated me, put me into tears, if I'm remembering correctly. This colored Cotswold, on the other hand, was an absolute pleasure to spin. This is one of my more like impressively consistent early spins. Like I look at this and I'm like, wow, I did a really good job. Considering this was like, again, a month or two into my spinning journey. And this is why, too, you cannot generalize about a sheep or a breed, because this Cotswold sample I would wear next to skin. I think I considered putting it in my breed study scarf, but nixed it because I didn't really need any extra length. But I was really impressed at how soft the colored sample was compared to the white as well, because there is kind of this like idea, I think, that a lot of people hold in the spinning community, that a lot of the times like colored fiber or darker fiber is inherently coarser, and that's not always true. And I think this is a prime example of how that's not always true. So don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to try again with a fiber that initially did not go super well for you. Next up are two spins that I just always love. I incorporate them in a lot of my spins. So Wensleydale and Teeswater. These are some of my like absolute favorite long wools. I never process them past like handpicking the curls. I think that the locks just by themselves are absolutely outstanding. I like Wensleydale's temperaments. I think it's closer to a Lincoln Longwool's temperament. And I just think, again, they look beautiful, and their curls are a little bit more lustrous than a Lincoln Longwool. Now, Teeswater's kind of fall into that same category, higher luster than a Lincoln Longwool. I keep the locks whole. However, Teeswater's are kind of a scary sheep. Teeswater's can be a little bit rude, a little bit aggressive. At least compared to a Lincoln Longwool, which is just like exceptionally docile, very like cow-like in the way that they kind of maneuver about the world. Teeswater's definitely make me a little bit more on edge. I need to kind of always keep my head on a swivel with Teeswater's, especially during mating season, during breeding season. They definitely get a lot more aggressive, and that's just something to know, that like some sheep breeds are going to be a little bit more aggressive than others, and Teeswaters definitely fall into that category. Honestly, there are some Teeswater locks too that like they feel like the softest mohair, so they can be really, really soft even though they have a longer staple length. But again, you won't catch me owning any Teeswater sheep. Before moving on to the like Leicester type category, so like Leicester Longwools, Border Leicesters, we'll call them the Bakewells. All the Bakewells. We're gonna get to the BFL, don't you worry. I did want to talk about this Drysdale. I have decided to call it like spinning Herdwick on easy mode, like a nice medium to long stapled Herdwick. That's what I would compare the Drysdale to. It's very dry and almost hair-like, kind of like Herdwick can be, but it's not an enjoyable spin, and I am pretty happy with this first skein of Drysdale. And of course, it wouldn't be, a video about the Longwools without all of the Leicester Longwools and, the like Robert Bakewell influenced sheep. I like all of these. I will say, I think that of all of them, controversial take, I think the Leicester Longwool is my favorite because I think it's just really shiny and beautiful. And I hear that when you shear Leicester Longwools, when you let them like back outside for the first time, they like sparkle in the sun because of how lustrous and shiny their hair is. So that story has always kind of enchanted me, and I just think I can see it in the fiber. So these are all of those sort of Leicester Longwool, BFL, Border Leicester samples. So this is going to be colored Border Leicester. Border Leicester is probably on the lower side, like not my most favorite to spin. However, this colored Leicester was a lot of fun and is super soft. And then, okay, so here is the BFL. This is a white BFL sample that I spun up that is absolutely beautiful. Wasn't my absolute favorite though. And then this is some less BFL that is dyed that I spun up. This is my Leicester Longwool sample. It is just so freaking shiny. Especially when I hold it up next to this, you can kind of see that they're related to each other. These were super duper enjoyable and again are very, very soft. I think if you're looking to introduce yourself to the world of long wools, but you've always been afraid because you don't want to spin rope, you don't want to spin something super coarse, get yourself some Leicester long wool, get yourself some BFL. BFL is widely available. You can find lots of hand-dyed top and roving and all of these things in BFL. My one recommendation with long wools compared to, especially if you've only spun fine wools, is that these don't need nearly as much twist to hold them together. This is because the staple length is a lot longer, so you simply do not need as much twist to hold any of these yarns together. And as a result, you can spin them very softly, which will emphasize their softer qualities. I don't know if I've ever held all of these guys up. It's nice though, they're all in the same family photo. So I know that was a long one. I am sure that you might have follow-up questions, especially about things like staple length, or if you need any more details about any of the breeds, drop a comment below. If you're already writing a comment, tell me what is your favorite breed of sheep to spin. And thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to keep up with the breed study, you want to see all the things that I'm spinning, don't forget to go follow me on Instagram and TikTok. And I hope you learned something. If you have a fun fact to share about any of the sheep that I might not have shared yet, drop that below as well. Don't forget to give me a follow if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on the next one.